Hello, my name is Connor.
And I'm Jason.
And you're listening to the Amazed and Perplexed podcast.
I want to welcome you to John chapter 6. I'm going to assume you've heard this podcast before, and I'm not going to say the typical thing I say about here's what and why we're doing it. But we are joining Jesus in the middle of a long conversation, and we're looking around the space, and this space is interesting because he has a big crowd, and it's about to thin considerably. And so... Connor, is there anything you would say after doing this multiple times? We're still basically in the same context, but anything that might shed some light on what we're looking for?
Yeah, so I think in the very first verse that we'll read, many of his disciples, it says that many of his disciples said, "This is a hard teaching. Who can accept it?" And I think my understanding of what the word of this concept that they're talking about, this hard teaching, is they are not necessarily talking about Jesus. This is a hard concept to understand, but it's a hard concept to live out. It's a hard concept to put into practice. It's weighty. It's hard to. It's hard. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
That's my understanding of the language that Jesus is using here. And so I think it's really important to remind ourselves that even, we talk all the time about like what's the applicability of a given passage here or there. And I think even you and me, and I'll just say myself, like, even though we know, like, well, we're reading this, we know the future of their lives, and we know we have so much more access to a lot of different things that they don't know at this point. And yet we still will struggle with like certain applicability of a statement, or struggle with the weightiness of something that Jesus says, and really trying to wrestle with how to fit it in. There's still, I think, the temptation on my part to make things more black and white for the disciples, to make it not about like, they're not like real people really wrestling, struggling, like figuring out how to put the things that Jesus is saying into practice. I tend to make them maybe one-dimensional, or maybe, if I'm being generous, two-dimensional. But like I often talk about the things that they don't like mentally understand about what Jesus is saying. And I think it's a kind of a really helpful thing to process. Maybe they by the end of this, they are mentally getting it. Maybe they're starting to understand the words that Jesus is saying better, but there's still the applicable piece, the actually living it out, is confronting them, and maybe that'd be helpful to track.
Yeah, I think so. And my assumption is they're still in this synagogue. So that's your setting. So it's a place where Jewish people would come and hear scripture read and receive some type of teaching. So he's in this space. He said hard things, and I think you're exactly right. I think they understood the words. I think they understood even the concept. But then imagining living that out, I think that's a good read of this. And I think it's fascinating. So in terms of context, he's the main theme here. Everybody's there for him. Some are there because he did a miracle yesterday in their time. And some are there because they've been following him and decided you're worth following, even if it takes us into conflict with our religious leaders and maybe our own families and this kind of thing. So there's a percentage of this group, and we're about to see this group, that are faced with the decision to stay or go. And then I'm wondering, do they rejoin? Do they, so it raises a lot of questions. If you imagine Jesus day to day, just walking from point A to point B, it's an intriguing dynamic of thinking, how close are the disciples? Are they walking as friends? There are times he seems separated. And in general, that, like, when you think about the groups you're part of, what holds you there? Mm-hmm. What would they need to say to make you leave? So the relational context here is fascinating to me.
Absolutely.
So I'll jump in, reading in verse 60, John chapter 6. On hearing it, that's it is his teaching, many of his disciples said, "This is a hard teaching. Who can accept it?" Aware that his disciples were grumbling about this, Jesus said to them, "Does this offend you? Then what if you see the Son of Man ascend to where he was before? The Spirit gives life, the flesh counts for nothing. The words I have spoken to you, they are full of the Spirit and life. Yet there are some of you who do not believe." For Jesus had known from the beginning which of them did not believe and who would betray him. He went on to say, "This is why I told you that no one can come to me unless the Father has enabled them." From this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. "You do not want to leave too, do you?" Jesus asked the 12. Simon Peter answered him, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God." Then Jesus replied, "Have I not chosen you, the 12? Yet one of you is a devil." He meant Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, who, though one of the 12, was later to betray him. Lots to work with there. Mm-hmm. What hits you? What amazes you about this?
I think what amazes me is, if I'm going to criticize Peter and the disciples as much as I do, I've got to give him props here. Like, Peter gets it, you know? Peter fully understands the point that Jesus is trying to get across with his teaching on being the bread of life, and the difference between going to Jesus to get things versus to get Jesus. And I think John, when he's writing this, seems to be really intent on showing you, like, hey, this is really challenging stuff. This is really at odds with even maybe how they would naturally think this was supposed to go. Yeah, I think it truly is amazing to me that they get it, that they have a lot of things going on in their cultural background, in the way that they have lived their lives. Like, I mean, the disciples, the 12, they are surrounded by these other people who have followed Jesus for a long time. There are relational ties to these same people that ultimately choose to walk away. And the fact that they are they are upfront to not just the public miracles of Jesus, but they just saw him walk on water. They just saw the extent of how much bread Jesus can give. And the fact that the majority of them stick with him, not because of how much bread they can give, but because he is the bread. That is a remarkable thing.
Yeah, I actually am amazed by the same thing. I've been surprised in my life. I have referenced verse 68 multiple times over the last few months, as, you know, way back when we were talking about parables, which I feel like was, you know, a year ago or whatever. And we're talking about specifically Matthew 13, where he's like, yeah, I speak in parables because they're not going to understand. The question then is, what is he looking for? And I think this is exactly what he's looking for. It's that idea of grit. It's the idea of I'm going to do it. I don't care what everybody else is doing. Man, that made no sense what just happened or what I just saw. That's okay. Mm-hmm. You know, here are the things I know. I remember grappling with the concept, and not even so much emotionally, but when we lost our first child, to a lesser degree when we had our miscarriages, it's that idea of God can do anything he wants, and he could bring life from nothing if he wanted to. He could heal anybody he wants, and you have to accept that if you're going to accept that he is, in fact, all-powerful. And then you have to accept, he's got a very different perspective than I do when he allows children to die, when he allows injustice to exist. I was talking with a good brother in Christ. He's a good brother in Christ, but we have a good connection.
Sure.
And yesterday, and he's been going through this situation as a result of just life change that has been really unjust. And we prayed and we prayed and we prayed. I just feel like it's been going on forever. And yesterday there was a shift. There was this, hey, I heard from somebody else and this happened. And it's almost like you got to be really careful. Mm-hmm. You don't get excited about it because, God hasn't come down and said, this is my servant to tell you this message. And so it may not make any difference at all. But it is that kind of thing. You're like, wouldn't a good God have at least signaled me he's going to help me here? And in this particular case, it does. And my perplexion is, why his disciples, not the 12, but the other disciples, why his words don't change their mind. Because I would think, I assume, and this is the problem, I assume what they're struggling with is he's asked us to eat his flesh and eat his blood, and he's claimed deity, but then also this weird part, that's weird. I would just think the whole thing. So for him to say, flesh counts for nothing, I'd have been like, oh, he's not talking about cannibalism here. That would have been clarifying, Peter's response is the response that I would think, but then that does it reminds me of how controversial it is for Jesus as a human. And what you said earlier is exactly right. Like, we know almost too much in reading the story, but they are still having to make the decision all the time. He's not just a man. Mm-hmm. And see, we have to be reminded all the time, he was a man. He wasn't just, God. And I think that's a bigger part of the struggle than I thought it was. But yeah, I do really want to give credit here. I think these words by Peter are becoming a refrain for me on, God, why aren't you doing this? And I'm like, yeah, but where else am I going to go?
Yeah. Well, and I think what's so beautiful about that is, like, there's this massive, just like long teaching that Jesus gives. And this is at the end of like miracles of walking on water and feeding 5,000. And then there's this radical new teaching where Jesus is making I am statements. He's saying he's God. He's saying the source of all these things. And at the end of it, he's left with a lot less disciples. And the remaining disciples, you would think this is part of the story where they go, yeah, man, we're on this, Jesus. We're ready to storm the gates of hell. We've got you. That we're going to run through a wall. I got animated and I hit our little stand. They'd be ready to run through a wall for Jesus. And their response is, yeah, what else are we going to do?
Yeah, exactly.
What else are we going to do?
That is true.
And I think this is one of those areas where, like, you can kind of be like, you can be perplexed, you can be baffled by it, but then to go like, Jesus, there's a sense of all the confrontations happen here that then Jesus would go on, no, that's not good enough. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not good enough. Like, you don't fully understand the breadth of what I'm offering you.
Right.
You say I'm the holy and anointed one, but I know, Peter, I know that you don't fully get it. And I find it amazing because in contrast to the people that desert Jesus, what Peter says here is amazing and incredible. But in terms of the full breadth of getting it, they're so far away. And for me, like, that just gives me so much comfort and so much help, because like there are times in my life where I have been I'm going to run through a wall for Jesus, metaphorically. And like, I like feel super impassioned. And other times, it's just, okay, God, I've got no other option. I'm with you. Mm-hmm. What else am I going to do? You're him. And God honors both of those.
I so love that. And I think, so yeah, I wasn't even thinking about it from that angle. I was really focused on, there is this reality, like in this particular passage, there's at least three things that really perplex me. And even, I imagine after I talk about it, I'll still be as perplexed, because I think I've already talked about it once or twice, with you. And I'm sure I've rolled it over in my mind a lot. And to me, like, I'm always asking myself, maybe even subconsciously, is what's the standard here? And this is true of anything. And it's not simply, what do I got to do to pass this test? Kind of thinking, I don't want to do the minimum. I want to live into it, and I want to get all that I can from whatever it is. But then I think because I was raised in a bit of a perfectionist state, and you better get this right or everything's through, the relationship's over, you can't come here anymore kind of feel, that is in the back of my mind. I'm like, okay, am I doing enough in my acceptance of God's grace?
That's good.
Am I doing what he expects here?
Yeah. And it's trying to usurp the role that Jesus is offering us, where it's like, we've said it 1,000 times, one of your really important, one of the really important things over the years that you've pointed out to me that we've talked about many times is the rich young ruler, and talking about what success looks like there. And I think about what is Jesus after in that interaction. And we've many times you've brought up the fact of like, what if he had just been like, what does that even look like? Jesus, there are people that rely on me. There are, like, there's all these, like, what am I going to do?
This is a complicated request.
Like, okay, like, I guess I can try, but because you see, you're Jesus, and I'm going to try, but you're going to have to help me here. And you get the sense like maybe Jesus been like, okay, maybe he would have been like, hey, here's exactly how we're going to sell your stuff. Or he would have just been like, okay, follow me. Let's go. And maybe he would have had to sell all the stuff. Maybe he wouldn't have. But there's a sense with the rich young ruler where if his reaction had been like, okay, I'm going to sell everything. Well, he still would have been relying on his own. He would have still been trying to earn his salvation, earn his...
here's my receipts for all the things I gave to the poor.
And earn his eternal life. And that's directly what Jesus is trying to stop here, is trying to address and trying to help get past us. Where I think, this is directly applicable. I think that's directly applicable to what Jesus is saying here. And this is something that I am routinely always struggling with, this temptation to pick it back up. The same thing that you can tell the people that are listening to Jesus are struggling with. Like, this is an active struggle for me every day.
And I think that's really important to point out. And it's not that we've never said it before, but there is an assumption. If I was doing this right, I would feel so good.
Yeah.
Or if I was standing right next to Jesus, everything would be clarified. It is the exact opposite. I think because of those assumptions, we don't press in as hard as we can a lot of times. Like, well, I'm not an apostle. I'm not a this, so I'm just going to settle for whatever. And I think that these guys were sold out clearly because he had just said something that was completely unacceptable, at the very least the cannibalism part, and maybe it's a bigger deal to them, him claiming deity. But it is that, number one, it's not the first time he's done that. But this is a big deal. But make no mistake, they're still confused. They're still unclear on what do you do with this.
Well, and I think about, so like for my own personal story, for when like I like chose to follow Jesus, there was like a baffled element to it. And I've talked about it before, although I'll assume we have a new listener, or, you've forgotten since then. So like my story was like I was 17, 18 years old, and I'd had a really embarrassing moment at church camp. Should have been the most embarrassing moment that I should have, every night before I got into bed, thought about this moment and felt the curse of that moment. And I felt this really odd holy protection over the course of, after this embarrassing event happened, I felt this like holy protection in my brain. Like I could almost see like a physical barrier, like holding back the flood of embarrassment. And over the course of a night, like I like began to realize it was Jesus. And there were lots of things that had come before that to help me realize that. And like when I chose to be like, okay, yeah, like I've got to follow him, there was thankfulness for not feeling the embarrassment and what Jesus was for me. But it was also like, I was more confused the next morning than I was before that. It's like I was, even though I had gained the clarity of like, I'm going to follow Jesus, I still had no idea what that meant. Like I still don't have a category for necessarily what happened to me. And yet, like, I think all of us know this. I think most of us know this intuitively. Like, I have heard so many people with similar stories where the moment they decided to be a disciple of Jesus was not rah rah, let's storm the gates, but it's what else, God? Like, you're the only option. If I'm going to make it, it's because of you.
Yeah, and I think it is important to remember, no matter whether it's those two, we'll put those as extremes, what you just presented, it still comes down to the heart that says, I'm just going to have to trust you with this. Mm-hmm. And that's the part, because we can imagine a scenario where somebody would be rah-rah, and they're like, they're not with God.
Yeah.
Like, it's pretty clear.
But I also have come to I've met people who that was their story, and it was very genuine. And what I love so much, and we're going to slightly recreate a conversation that we had before we started recording, was the fact that Jesus will give this big, long example. He'll give this big, long talk about being the bread of life and the difference between going to him to get bread versus going to him because for who he is and accepting that. And so many people fall away from him, run away from him, and then he singles out the 12 to say, hey, are you sticking with me? And Peter speaks up for the 12 and says, where else are we going to go? Well, in that midst and at the end, Jason read that Judas is a part of these 12 people that, he was going, he did not fully believe what Peter was saying, was representing as the group consensus. And I think it's so helpful to think about. I think it's just a helpful reminder that John places this at the end of this little passage, that he gives a direct example for what it can look like. There are people who are just going to outright reject the message of who Jesus says he is, and then there are people who are going to seem like they are a part of the crowd, part of everything accepting, but truly not accepting him as the bread of life. And I think it's helpful for me. One, it's helpful to have this example, but it's also helpful to go like, man, the second I try to pin down, okay, this is exactly what this looks like, and that's how God's going to move, then like I have these examples to go, no, it didn't look like that, because Judas is just as part of the, like, because Judas is a part of the 12 here that seemingly get it really, really right. And so like I think what you said was really important, is, and again, very easy, very cliche, but it's truly about the heart. It's about the humility and the posture of how you are interacting, not just with Jesus, but how you're taking the reality of who he is deep into your being. So I don't know. You talked about what perplexed you. Do you have anything else perplexes Maces?
Yeah, I will go back to a conversation we had 3 episodes ago or something, that I'm just still, and maybe we'll always not get, but he went on to say, this is verse 65, that I told you that no one can come to me unless the Father has enabled them. I'm like, okay, so does he want all men to come to the knowledge of the truth and salvation? Or does he say, no, I enable certain people to come to me, which I assume means he doesn't enable others, and in this context, I would say, okay, so he's saying that in response to the 12, to Peter saying, hey, basically on behalf of the 12, where else are we going to go? But then he's like, yeah, I told you in the beginning, this kind of thing. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. I tend to say there's a meaning of this that I don't fully grasp. I do know there are people that are like, yeah, if you preach to 100 people and 2 respond, the 98 aren't equipped to hear it, and so they can't do it. And I'm like, so they go to hell because, is that what it's saying here? Or is he saying we're enabled in different seasons? I tend to say I'm going to go with the clear truth that God so loved the world that he came to, but it is. I mean, it's a thing. And then the other part is, why mention this now and not be proactive about Judas? It's just a weird thing. I mean, I would think, I had a guy call me and he said the other day, he goes, hey, there's one of our members that she's doing this. I think that's being active and her basically sowing evil. What are the elders and staff, we as members, what are we to do with this? You know what I mean? Well, I think everybody universally would see it as weakness. We're like, nothing. At the very least, I'm like, we're going to pray about it. We're watching for an opportunity, or we're going to arrange a meeting, or however it goes. Jesus says, one of you is a devil. So many weird things about it. Number one, if you and I and 10 other people are here and you're like, and one of you is a devil, I'm be like, so which one?
Yeah.
I why would you say that? Like, that just would not be a conversation. I'd be like, oh, okay. Mm-hmm. That's good information.
It would come up at some point.
Yeah, I just, hey, about that devil thing, yesterday. It's such a weird deal that it just sits there. Mm-hmm. It's a weird deal to me that he's not confronted. I do understand that Judas, like, God has already seen what's going to happen. And so Jesus has been told this will happen. Mm-hmm. It's been foretold. Still, I don't know. Again, I don't know what to do with that, because if I knew you were the devil in this particular case, I would want you not to collude with the devil anymore. Mm-hmm. I would say, hey, what's on your mind? And how do we help this?
It is staggering that for a good portion of Jesus' ministry, the devil. And again, we could talk a lot about what Jesus necessarily means, just exactly, even by calling him that. But mm-hmm. I don't know if I have the depth right now or the rest. I stayed up for the Thunder game last night, so my brain power is not operating at 100% capacity, which is not a lot, anyways.
The Thunder reference is the Oklahoma City Thunder, a National Basketball Association.
Yeah, no, I just love listening to Thunder every night.
We do have crazy weather.
Yeah, no, we do. It's terrible, which is why the basketball team is named Thunder. Anyways, I think it is. You have to live with the fact. Like, we don't have to live to. I think we need to acknowledge the fact that Jesus does a lot of his ministry. I mean, the people besides Judas, like these disciples, these are some of the most important people in all of human history. Now, again, I don't think Jesus like classifies people that way, but these are the people that are starting his movement. People who, without them, you and I wouldn't be sitting here. The way that Jesus builds his kingdom and builds his church is through people, and these are the first people that are doing it. And Jesus allows somebody who clearly doesn't not just like Peter doesn't get it at times, but like Jesus has very, very like much more harsh words. Although Jesus does tell. Yeah, so I don't know. Actually, now I'm rethinking this. But the overall point I think the overall point of like Jesus is okay with Judas being with him until the end. I don't know if it's like if that has something to say about how we deal with group dynamics in churches, or how we deal with if it's applicable at all to today's day and age. But like if you grew up in a certain setting of the mindset of what enters the body is what makes you foul, what makes you sick or makes you unpure. I think this is one of those things that like if we truly allow ourselves to think about the ramifications of allowing Judas to remain close to and a vital part of Jesus' ministry, it opens the door to a lot of different questions.
Yeah, and then I have these different levels. On one hand, I'm like, man, Jesus is so gracious, continuing to offer to Judas the opportunity, because I think every man that was there at least had the opportunity, because these are human people like we are today, to think, am I the devil? Mm-hmm. And then to process that. I've asked myself, am I the problem in this system? My family's at odds, and I think it's this person's fault, but am I the problem? And I think that's healthy. I think asking that question is really healthy, and I could see just doing that. So on that level, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And of course, on the level of just pure data, pure just absolute accuracy, he's right, And so, and I think it is important to define what exactly he means by the devil here. But it is that application part that always trips me up. Mm-hmm. Is number one, should I be doing this? Well, number one, I don't know, but if I'm in a group, like I got a call from a member, and something happened, somebody had negatively affected them. So they said, I don't even know how to talk to them. And I'm like, well, I've got a good relationship. Let me just ask and have them tell the story. And so I called them, and they told the story, and I saw it from their point of view. And hopefully we did some stuff to make that work between them. But it's like, what if the guy said, I don't want to talk to you. I did it. Don't care. You know what I mean? Well, I would have had another conversation, but I'll tell you what I wouldn't have done. When I get up to preach, or let's say I'm teaching a class with 12 people in it and he's in it, I wouldn't be like, yeah, and in general, one of you is a liar. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It just, on every level of acting this out, it just seems so weird. Yeah. It seems so unhealthy.
Yeah, what's interesting? I just kind of noticed this. So Jesus uses the language. So John quotes Jesus as saying, "Have I not chosen you, the 12? Yet one of you is a devil." And then, in John's words, how he phrases is he meant Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, who was one of the 12, who would later betray him. And I think about that. So Jesus has a present, like, hey, one of you is a devil, like right now. And then the way John phrases it is Judas will betray him. And so, like, I think about the active, when Jesus says this and he knows it's about Judas, this is like, is this so I'm struck. People use this language. What I'm about to say, people use this language to describe the kingdom, but there's an almost a here but not yet element of like the betrayal and the duplicitousness of Judas. And I'm just really, this is where I'm perplexed by. I'm confused by a timeline is too simplistic here, by what this looks like, that Jesus is recognizing in the moments that Judas will betray him, or he recognizes that Judas is a devil. And again, maybe next time we can talk a little bit, maybe we'll have a little preamble about what that means. I don't feel super confident about that right now. I'd want to brush up a little bit. Jesus is confident that Judas right now is acting or is a devil, but his betrayal comes later, and I just don't know what to do with that. I don't know if it has any applicable thing. I just don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, and so my assumption is here he's saying, I want to make this clear to the reader, the why.
Yeah.
Why would Jesus say that? What about all these other things? You could have offered clarity. So this raises more questions to me.
Yeah, the fact that he is intent on, he wants to draw our attention to this. There's some question he's trying to answer to the people that would have been reading this, some sort of question surrounding Judas. And so I don't have an answer. I don't have an answer for it. But I am left perplexed.
Yeah. I think it is interesting. This word in the Greek, I'm just looking it up right now, is the standard word. It's where it's in Greek, it's diabolos, which if you're familiar with Spanish, diablo. And that's where we get the word devil, accuser, slanderer.
Much cooler than
diablo.
Than devil.
Yeah, I can't even say it without going to my lower register. Diablo. It just feels wrong. But anyway, so it is the standard word, but the bigger picture is how is he contextualizing this? Because when Jesus says to Peter in Matthew 16, "Get behind me, Satan," it's clear in context he's contrasting, because he just told Peter that came from God, and now he's saying, "Get behind me, Satan, you do not have the things of God on your mind." Well, when? Well, right now. Like you're thinking in a panicky way, your friend's going to die, and the answer is, I'm just going to take charge. And he's saying that's what Satan thinks like. Mm-hmm. So he's not calling him like you're Satan incarnate. All of a sudden, Satan's in charge of your body. And at this point in Jesus' life, Satan has not inhabited him, though it is interesting. John will be the one that says Satan, at that point, this is right before the betrayal, Satan entered him, and then he went and said, all right, let's get this done. Here's where Jesus is going to be, that kind of thing. And yeah, I think it's endlessly fascinating. I think all of the Bible is. I think these type of passages where you're like cause and effect, if you link this to the earlier statement that Jesus made, it's like, okay, so could we safely say that Judas was not enabled to connect with Christ, mm-hmm. that there's this block in him? And then what does that say about God? And I mean, I'm the clay. He's the potter. He can do whatever he wants. Sure. But it's trying to figure out what's just. And I'm not in any position to put God on trial. Mm-hmm. And my assumption is God wants me to grapple. The very basis of Amazed and Perplexed is this idea of God wanting us to struggle and grapple, but then to come back to the conclusion that Peter does.
Yeah, I think there's a thought here that I have about the danger of people on the inside who want to use Jesus for the bread he can provide and the damage that they can do. The disciples that desert Jesus, it's not good. It's bad. Deserting Jesus is really bad. We don't get any more information, and then they went and led like a genocide, or then they went and did this horrible, awful thing. Yeah. The data that we have shows that there's this one guy who's on the inside who still just can't view Jesus as the bread of life, who can't view him beyond what he can get from him, what he needs from him, what he thinks his country needs from him. And the damage that causes is just astronomical. It ends with humans literally killing God. And I think there's some truth when I think about our churches, when I think about relationships where the sort of damage that somebody on the inside can cause when they are not somebody who truly believes that Jesus is the bread of life. I think we all know the sort of damage that looks like, and I think there maybe it frees us up for the people that we have anxiety or sadness or whatever it be, who just completely walked away. Like, that's bad, and that's we should pray for those people. We should try to reach them. We should try to always be Jesus to them. But we also need to recognize there's a more dangerous kind of there's a more dangerous kind of falling away, and that's the kind of falling away of the person that who sticks around. And so, yeah, no happy positive ending for that. But
well, I will say it's convicting. I was with a student one time, and he was asking some questions about his future, and I was just speaking very authoritatively. I didn't think I was, but I was. And there's a pause, and he goes, "Do you think you're God?" And usually I'd perceive that as a smart aleck remark, but I took it as a sincere question, and it caused me to do good thinking, whatever he meant by it. And I'm like, yeah, I get what you're saying. I don't, but I do understand, and I need to do some thought. I need to, and that to me is how I want to always come away from Scripture, even if I'm like, I get all that. I understood every little bit of it. I want to be of a mind, His ways are not my ways, even when I think I've got a good sense of Him, even when I think I have Him figured out. I'm not God. Mm-hmm. And there's something beautiful to that release. And there is something always going to be confusing about it. Mm-hmm. And so I think to be at peace, I remember I was with some teenagers at camp, and one of them had written on their arm, like they just wrote out their tattoo, being okay, it's okay that I'm not okay, basically. And I think that sums up a lot of people's lives in the Bible. They would not have assessed their present place. John the Baptist isn't thinking, I'm going to be beheaded. I'm feeling good about this. Mm-hmm. It's like, that's not okay. And I think but the key there is never assuming you're not the guy, mm-hmm. but always taking the time to say, God, am I the guy? Do I need to, because me being the devil saying to God, man, I don't want to be this. Help me not be this. That's the cure.
Yeah.
Not me figuring out how not to be the devil, but me saying to God, if I'm the devil, I don't. So even there, I'm like, ooh, is he saying to Judas, hey, I'm giving you a chance here. Mm-hmm. Think it through. I think he means me. I know it's lurking in my mind. Yeah. I should betray him or whatever that goes. So that's interesting too.
That's so good. And I'll stop here because I think I could keep going. But Jesus looking probably not directly at Judas. Otherwise, everyone would have maybe necessarily got it. But Peter makes this confession of, hey, this is what we all believe. And Jesus, really? This is what you all believe. That's what you all believe. And yeah, I think that's important. Jesus looking at all of us. This is what you believe. This is what you believe. Grace, peace, and love.